Will Florence. Will completed a bachelor's in nutrition sciences at NC State University in 2012. Then in 2015, he also completed a bachelor's in family and consumer sciences at North Carolina Central University. During his career, he has completed multiple nutrition and healthcare internships and performed management services in the food industry. In 2016, he completed a dietetic internship at North Carolina State University, and now he's currently working at the Poe Center as a health educator, teaching children about nutrition and cooking lessons. Today, Will is going to present on the effects of cooking classes on childhood obesity rates and nutrition-related knowledge in children from ages from 10 to 18. We will have a time for questions and answers at the end of Will's presentations. I would like you to write your questions in the chat for the speaker, and then we'll have discussions at the end. Okay, Will, you can start.
So hey everybody, I'm Will Florence. I'm a master's in nutrition student here at NC State. And today I just want to thank everybody for joining us first of all. And yeah, having a few technical difficulties, but I'm going to go at it the best I can here. So today we're going to talk about the effects of cooking classes on childhood obesity rates and nutrition related knowledge in children ages 10 to 18. So first off, just to give a little background on myself, as Andrea stated, I'm currently working over at the Poe Center, and I was hired as a health educator. And so basically my job is to teach children about nutrition and about cooking classes. And, you know, cooking is near and dear to my heart, and as well as nutrition. And so, you know, being over at the Poe Center, I've only been able to teach about one full class, and it's a virtual class, but you know, we work primarily in one of the classes with a population of children that get screened through Wake Med, and they are considered, you know, overweight or at risk for being overweight, and so we teach them cooking classes and basic cooking skills. And you know, I'm just very curious about this topic. So some of the objectives here, we're going to define childhood obesity and examine potential implications of the obesity pandemic, some places it's called. And we're going to examine the psychology behind active learning, identify the effects of cooking classes on obesity and nutrition related knowledge in youth, examine limitations with current models, and outline further areas of research and determine next steps to take. So to define childhood obesity is considered when a child has a BMI range, BMI for age range of greater than or equal to the 95th percentile on BMI for age growth charts. And so basically there's a difference between childhood obesity and adult obesity in the way that they're identified and screened. So, you know, with an adult, obesity would be considered greater than a BMI of 30, but in children, they tend to look at, they look at what is a child's weight and age relative to other children in that age group. And so here they're determining just the risk for other health factors, you know, so they consider them obese, and then they're looking at the risk for other health factors here. Let's see. And so here we have, sorry, the Zoom thing out of the way. Here we have on the x-axis down here, we have age in years, and then on the y-axis, we have BMI. And so as I stated earlier, as I stated earlier, the a BMI age range of greater than the 95th percentile, which is this line right here, is considered obese in children. So for example, if a child was 10 years old and had a BMI of 22, then that would be considered obese for children. Whereas, you know, for an adult, a BMI of 22 would be normal. So just, you know, just kind of looking at the difference here in childhood obesity versus adult obesity. Okay. And so here we have a couple charts, and basically we're looking here at the rate of adults obesity versus the rate of children's obesity. And so as you can see here, sorry, these things are popping up on my screen here. So as you can see here, there's a significant increase. So from the year 2000 all the way to 2016, there's a 33% increase, not in the number, not in the 4.5%, but that 4.5% relative to the number of obesity here. So there's a much larger increase proportionately with regards to the rise in the rate of obesity versus with regards to adults here. And so why does this matter? So this is, you know, obesity, it's important because so it's there's 112,000 deaths per year associated with obesity. And there's approximately a cost. And so these are, you know, some of these are statistics for adults. However, I want to point out that children who are obese are more likely to become obese adults. And so $1,429 per year more for obese adults as compared to folks that have a normal BMI. And a third of obese preschoolers and a half of obese school-aged children will become obese adults. And so there's an estimated annual cost of approximately 150 billion per year with regards to obesity. And there's a 27% rise in healthcare spending as a result of the obesity epidemic. And there are things that happen, increased labor and market costs and delayed skill acquisition, as well as there seem to be lower productivity in these members of society. And there's a whole host of health effects that we'll look at in the next slide here. So what are some of the effects of obesity here? Some of the health-related complications, there's a lot of them. There's, you know, anxiety and depression, dyslipidemia, hypertension, different types of cancer, type 2 diabetes, inflammation, atherosclerosis, insulin resistance, increased free fatty acids, and sleep apnea, as well as oxidative stress. And, you know, in particular, with regards to the youth, again, I don't have the statistic in front of me, but it is approximately 1 in 25 youth has hypertension, and then there's also a significant amount that are also have at risk for just high blood pressure in general, just elevated blood pressure here. And so, you know, hopefully there's a better way. And you know, as far as this goes with relationship to obesity, you know, so approximately 1/3 of calories consumed by children are consumed in form of meals and snacks away from the home. And this is certainly contributing to the amount of obesity seen in children. And so there's been research that shows that, and we'll go into this in our in the later studies, but that food preparation in the home has far more health benefits as opposed to foods that are prepared out to eat, or as opposed to going out to eat and already prepared snacks. So again, out to eat foods tend to decrease the quality of foods consumed and promote weight gain in children. And there are better food choices. So you know, some of these studies that I looked at suggest that, you know, it's fairly easy when we're serving healthy foods in a school setting, but as far as, you know, we need to look at what are we doing outside of the school setting. And so this obesity epidemic is not only as a result of, you know, it's a result of poor food choices inside and outside of school. So, you know, with regards to meal preparation. And so it's estimated that the years life lost as a result of obesity are greatest in younger adults. And, you know, there was a study that looked into if a child had a BMI, for example, of 35, then that child basically taking that all the way out, you know, to adulthood, that child would have a greater number of years lost in their life than, say, an obese adult. And so now that we've defined childhood obesity and examined potential implications of the obesity epidemic, now we're going to take a look at some of the psychology behind active learning here. So just a little bit of background on the social cognitive theory here. Excuse me. Basically, what we see here is the idea that the environment plays a part in the behavior, and the behavior plays a part in personal factors. And so to kind of give an example here, if children, you know, some of the studies looked at the fact that children taking cooking classes in a setting where, you know, where they were comfortable and they were having fun and trying different foods and that type of thing. And so studies have shown that when their environment is positive, the children are more likely to elicit positive behavior changes. So, you know, a child would be more engaged with regards to the cooking and interactive. And then, so these personal factors, that's referring to self-efficacy and motivation. So, you know, children would be, if they have a positive environment and their behaviors, you know, they're eliciting positive responses in the class, then their self-efficacy, so basically their motivation and their confidence in their abilities is going to be increased. And so just kind of this whole triangular relationship here of, you know, how these things impact one another. And so if, for example, if a child is more motivated and feeling confident about their cooking skills, then that's going to increase the overall environment here for the classes. And so, you know, a lot of the studies that I looked into, actually, in fact, most of these for the cooking classes, the interventions used were based on the social cognitive theory here. And so, you know, as I stated, this whole idea of self-efficacy is extremely important with regards to cooking, because these are skills that will be used, could be used for a lifetime. And so kind of this idea of if a child can see the immediate kind of rewards with regards to cooking, you know, if they're cooking and, you know, they get to try the food afterward and see how it tastes, and that they're more likely to be confident and motivated. And these true skills and abilities tend to kind of translate over into later in life. And something else that was kind of relevant throughout all of the studies that I looked at was this idea that knowledge is a lot easier to acquire than behavioral change. Again, I don't have the statistic right in front of me, but it's something like there was one study that showed that it took approximately 15 hours to gain maybe nutrition knowledge, whereas with behavioral change, it took approximately 50 hours. And so again, children tend to be, if, you know, with the behavioral change, if they're vested, then we tend to see better results here. And the positive effective social context is kind of that whole idea of what I was talking about with the environment, creating this positive environment for children, so that they're, you know, if a child is going, you know, in a class and laughing and smiling and trying food, and, you know, it's almost contagious. You know, again, what we've seen is that with the external factors such as the environment, they certainly are important, but the internal factors such as the self-efficacy and the motivation tend to produce greater results. So there tends to be more of a reward for children with this. So Piaget's theory, again, one of the studies that we'll look at later on is so they really wanted to examine the idea, and basically most cooking classes tend to kind of play off Piaget's theory, which is this idea of concrete experiences, that children need concrete experiences rather than abstract ones, you know. So again, this whole idea of knowledge being, you know, important, but that children can't grasp these, you know, this knowledge. They need concrete experiences, things they can feel, taste, touch, smell. And so, you know, like in this example, you see the little child trying to touch the flower, and then the little child with examining the snail, and then they get to the point where it's almost like they're, you know, trying to determine a difference between an apples and another type of food, and then they go on to, I don't know, maybe get a college degree, just kind of going through these different stages in life. But really the emphasis here is the idea that they need direct exposure, and they need these concrete experiences rather than these kind of abstract sort of experiences. And so I just, you know, found it helpful here to kind of highlight the different, you know, because if we're talking about, you know, approximately ages 10 to 18. So again, here mentioning that concepts are attached to concrete situations, and just how important this is. And then, you know, we go on to like the formal operational stage, and to kind of give some context to this, you know, whenever children get to this age, and maybe a little bit older than 11 per se, but they begin to be able to be a little more theoretical and hypothetical, and they can use logic and reasoning. So maybe, you know, for example, being able to not just follow a recipe, but maybe translate some of the skills used in a recipe to kind of their own knowledge base. So maybe if a recipe was used sauteing, the child could say, okay, well, this sauteing is applicable in other areas as well. So the Kolb's learning cycle here, this is, again, just to basically to solidify this idea. You know, we see in step one here that the first kind of thing going on here is observation. So watching, and then we have assimilating from thinking or from watching to thinking. And so that's, you know, a little more abstract, and then going from conceptualizing and thinking to actually doing, experimenting, and then the step four being these these concrete experiences and how they feel. And so, you know, this, again, this idea of, you know, the feelings being, you know, their motivation and their confidence and that type of a thing. So now we've examined the psychology behind this active learning. Now we're gonna, you know, kind of take a look at some of the effects of these cooking classes on obesity and nutrition related knowledge in the youth. So this first study here, the LA Sprout study, this one looked at it. Basically, there were two groups here, and they were given, one group was given 45-minute cooking and nutrition lessons, and the other group was not given these cooking and nutrition lessons. And so with this study, they, you know, they had a garden, and they were taking food from the garden to doing farm to table kind of exercises here. And so, you know, some of the results of these cooking classes was that, you know, they saw overall a reduction in BMI among the participants who received the cooking classes. They also saw a decrease in waist circumference, and they saw an increase in fiber intake, as well as an increase in the intake of whole grains, beans, and peas. And so, you know, the idea here being, you know, well, maybe, you know, it can't really say that these cooking classes necessarily prevent obesity, but maybe the idea that with regards to things like having a reduced BMI and a reduced waist circumference and eating more vegetable products, potentially these types of classes could help with obesity. And so the Cook Shop program, this one was done primarily with ages K through 6. And this was one that really looked at the idea of the social cognitive theory model, and they wanted to, you know, take it to the next level by having these concrete sort of experiences with children. And so they specifically integrated Piaget's theory here. And so what was going on in this study was they had one group was given these cook shop lessons, and these cook shops, what they call it, and the other one were given food and environment lessons. And the food and environment lessons were basically, you know, just lessons given where a child was, you know, able to learn about plants, and they were able to learn about just certain things in ecology. And whereas the cook shop was a much more vested kind of a model here, and this was one where the children basically were they had 13 weeks of cooking classes, or 13 different foods that they had on the menu. And so what they did in this one was that in the cafeteria, they had they would feature items that the children were cooking in the cook shop. And so they were kind of, you know, they were really trying to utilize this idea of this constant exposure here. And, you know, so they would feature a whole grain or a vegetable, and the children would learn how to prepare that food, and then the food cafeteria staff would learn how to prepare that food. And so it would be featured during the week, and you know, and then the children would also be cooking it. And so it kind of just gave them this well-rounded, you know, approach of, you know, well, what does that food look like when it's cooked, and it gave them just more incentive to try it. And what they found was that there was a positive impact of these cooking classes on those that had the cooking classes versus the food and environment lessons. And specifically, the group that had the cooking classes tended to have an increase in their preferences for plant foods, specific, vegetables. And they used surveys, so they looked at nutrition related knowledge, and they found an increase in nutrition related knowledge with regards to these cooking classes. And again, there was, because the children were actually, in the kitchen and learning how to prepare these food, there was a greater amount of self-efficacy. So there was a higher amount of motivation and confidence seen in the children here. And as a result, there was changes in their behaviors towards foods and cooking. So this next study was called Cooking with Kids, and it was primarily focused on low-income Hispanic schools, and it looked at fourth graders, and it was a 10-week program here. And also, so they used a nutrition and a graduate nutrition student, where this student received 30 hours of graduate training, of training with regards to these nutrition classes. And so the children were given 3 lessons in cooking these different foods, and they were cooking different foods of different ethnicities. So one, they had one that was like a rice, and another one that was a potato, and then I can't remember what the last one here was, but so basically, what they found was that in these cooking classes, basically what to look for here is that, and what they found is the ones that were given the cooking classes had an increase in preferences for fruits. So the Cooking with Kids, as you can see here, if you look at the difference between the Cooking with Kids and the comparison, like in the boys, for example, it went from, they had a 0.67 here versus a 0.11 over in the comparison group, and in the girls, they had 0.72 versus a negative 0.45. And this was for vegetable consumption. Again, this one had a 3-fold effect compared with the results there for fruits. So a 3-fold effect in the amount of vegetables consumed, or preference for vegetables, versus in the classes with the Cooking with Kids versus the comparison group here. And again here, this one is their attitude toward food and cooking compared between the 2 groups. So there was, we have here 1.66 versus a negative 0.29. So there were really large differences in their attitudes towards food and cooking. So, the idea here being that, how motivated are they? Not how motivated, but, what is their attitude toward cooking? What is their attitude? Are they excited for it, or are they, not looking forward to it? And so we saw significant increases here in the groups with the cooking classes. And again, this one looking at self-efficacy and basically the idea of motivation and confidence again in their ability to cook. And so we saw significant increases here. So some of the takeaways from this study, we saw, again, overall improvement seen with regards to vegetable preferences. There was an increase in cooking and food prep attitude, and cooking and food prep self-efficacy. And so something interesting about this study was that even though it was primarily targeted towards a different population, a Hispanic population, what they saw in this was that most of the results they found were seen in Western US white students. And so, you know, what they surmised is, well, maybe this, even though this particular curricula was tailored to that population, maybe, you know, maybe this curricula could be used elsewhere. And so, you know, just kind of, again, looking at the idea that these cooking skills are transferable, and that you know, maybe it doesn't have to be one, or maybe one curricula kind of meets all deal here. And so this last study we'll look at here was the expanding children's food experiences, so the impact of a school-based kitchen garden program. And this was a little longer study. So this was a 2-year-long study, and it featured mainly 8 to 12-year-olds. And they used this one, the children grew different vegetables, and then they actually, so this one was a farm to table type of study here. And so they had them making 3 and 4 course meals, and there was a 90-minute cooking class. And so they were really looking primarily at a child's willingness to try and to describe new foods. And so what they found was that this study had a lot of really, you know, really interesting results, in that, you know, they found a lot more qualitative feedback rather than quantitative data here. And so, you know, they tended to focus on feedback from the parents and feedback from the teachers. And so a lot of the feedback seen in this study was, you know, my kids are really excited to come home and cook. And, you know, I know that there was one piece of feedback that said, you know, my child normally doesn't eat salad, but now my child, you know, did this recipe and came home and said, hey, I want to eat the stuff with the green leaves in it. And so there was an increased confidence to try new foods. And, you know, as a result, these children tended to make better choices at home with this sort of farm to table approach, where the children were, you know, helping grow the foods, and then also taking the foods and cooking with them. And this is kind of the approach that the Poe Center uses as well. They have a garden as well as a kitchen. And so, you know, there have been, you know, like in this study, there was a lot of positive results that, you know, the children really enjoyed going to the garden and taking the food from the garden and cooking with that food. And again, this one was particularly important in determining, you know, again, showing that positive social affective context here, where they would sit down and eat meals together, you know, after they prepared them. And so this tended to relate to an increased exploration of foods by these children. And again, kind of this idea, really honing in on this idea that it takes a lot longer to change behavior than it does to just acquire knowledge about these things. And this study was particularly did a particularly good job of demonstrating that. And so some kind of overall takeaways from these classes, from these studies here, were that cooking classes tend to promote a community atmosphere, and that self-efficacy is associated with classes could promote behavior change. So again, this idea of confidence and the children having this confidence and self-awareness, you know, might actually promote the behavior change. And again, the behavior change being more time consuming than knowledge. That was riddled throughout the papers I examined. And that behavior change possibly could be elicited through these culinary classes. And I will tell you, as I go into the limitations here, that there were not a whole lot of studies that related childhood obesity to cooking classes. And And even the studies that were out there, as one of the papers put it, were they were much more kind of abstract. They didn't have, like, they were more similar to these qualitative results. They didn't have real data specific results. So certainly an area where there could be more research done. And so now we're going to look into the limitations with current models here. So what is the feasibility of these cooking classes? Again, you know, this idea of cooking to learn, that, you know, there's, again, most of the studies did, you know, tend to look at, they all use cooking classes, but a lot of them, you know, just certainly did not really have strong results. And so kind of looking into the idea of the community setting here, and is it, I guess some of the limitations are, is it really feasible to cook in the classrooms? You know, there are a lot of different factors that go into this. You know, one of the studies had they used parents, and they used nutrition graduate students as well as teachers. And so it's a real, it's not something where, you know, children could just come to class and necessarily the grade school teacher could just teach a cooking class. There's a lot more that goes into it, you know, with the funding, as far as, you know, buying the food and providing the correct setting where the child's going to be comfortable. And so just, you know, it just kind of made me wonder, how feasible are these cooking classes in classrooms? And something that, you know, could probably be a whole nother paper on its own, is the idea that home economics classes are kind of a thing of the past. And you know, so so teachers, you know, and so that in and of itself is kind of limiting. Basically, so teachers, you know, some of the studies looked at, well, teachers aren't necessarily given the resources necessary. Largely, you know, when surveyed, or at least according to one of the studies, teachers, a lot of them don't have necessarily a nutrition knowledge base and background, especially with regards to cooking. And not to mention, it's a whole lot to have to take on teaching, in addition to kind of like providing nutrition education as well as culinary education. And so, you know, as a lot of us probably see with regards to food advertising, a lot of the food advertising we see is for, you know, fast food and for convenient snacks. And, you know, so finding a way to displace some of this, and you know, that's what the cooking classes have done, is to, you know, displace some of this whole, the idea of, you know, kids wanting, you know, kids are very much, they see what their peers are doing and they want to do what their peers are doing. And so if drinking Kool-Aid is the cool thing, the kids drink Kool-Aid. They want to drink Kool-Aid like their friends are. And so if we could, you know, finding a way to kind of change some of this food advertising, or at least a way to displace some of it. And, you know, governmental targeting, again, a whole nother study could probably be done on this alone, but the Michelle Obama's Let's Move campaign, and, you know, what a wonderful campaign. And, you know, but when I was looking into the research behind it, some of the, you know, little criticisms behind with these papers were that it didn't emphasize a whole lot on nutrition education, and in particular with regards to culinary classes. So, you know, this is one of those things that we need to, that has to be looked at from all angles. So including the government in this too. And then of course, relying on parents to teach their children about cooking is, well, not all parents cook, and not most, but and some parents don't necessarily have time, and they're for a number of reasons, not to throw them under the bus or anything, but it's just we all have busy lives, and in particular parents, and so to kind of to leave the ball in their court to teach their children about cooking is not necessarily a great way to do it. And of course, timing, the sort of typical stigma is that it takes a long time to prepare healthy foods and it's expensive. And so this is something that's holding us back, is that that's not necessarily the case. There are ways to prepare healthy, convenient foods quickly. And so, again, just this idea of obesity, I mean, I just found this quote pretty remarkable, that, consumption of meals and snacks prepared away from home were greater than a third of total calories consumed among children and adolescents. So we looked at limitations, and now we're going to talk a little bit about areas of further research and next steps to take here. So what is ideal? What is, if what we have isn't ideal, then what is ideal? And I would, and found a wonderful article about, the diminishing amount of home economics classes. And so I thought, so, some of the ideas in that article were that, we would come up with, or that there would be a new age sort of home economics class developed for children. So, that it would almost be like this, as they quote them, hunting and foraging for 21st century. And, so what would that look like? That would be, kind of making meal prep simple. So teaching, if we think about the population of 11 to 18, and that's a very wide range population. A lot of, when you get to 18, some are preparing to enter the workforce, some are going away to college, and some are still at home with mom and dad, or they could be doing anything. And but this whole idea of them wanting some sort of independence, it would need to be a class that teaches quick, convenient foods that are made healthy and simple, simplicity, and given basic tools, sauteing, boiling, chopping, baking, things that I grew up in a kitchen, in a home where there was a lot of cooking. And so those things are sort of come natural to me, but that just not natural, but they were instilled, but that's not the case for everybody. So really, basic tools also being giving them a little bit of a background on nutrition and how to read food labels, and price change, looking at price fluctuations and price per unit, just kind of things that someone like myself who was kind of raised in nutrition and cooking would probably take for granted, and integrating these points into other classes too. So cooking is science, and so this would be a great area to incorporate ideas about cooking, science classes and math classes, looking at things like price per unit, and economics classes, simple ideas in the sense of, maybe buying in bulk is cheaper, maybe it's not, and things of that nature. And then, education is key. Educating, in all facets. That's the key here. And bringing dietitians into the mix for sure. So kind of what are some next steps here? Again, this idea that children want to do what their peers are doing. And so some of the really kind of fascinating research, again, that a whole paper could, or a whole presentation could be done on, was this idea of peer-to-peer teaching, and how, similar to the idea that children want to do what their friends are doing. So if their friends are, playing video games and eating fast food, they want to do that. But also if their friends are, exercising and maybe helping out in the kitchen, they like doing those types of things. And so future studies, hopefully we'll look into, and there probably are some out there, but we'll look into the idea of peer-to-peer teaching here. And so what is the effectiveness? And actually some older psychology models, showed that that's a really effective way to teach, is through peers teaching one another. And then, excuse me, the idea that I was talking about before with healthy advertising, and not sure 100% how that could be done with regards to cooking classes necessarily, but healthy advertising to displace some of this maybe fast and convenience foods. And not that there's anything wrong with those foods, but they have been shown to, increase waist circumference or be lower quality choices and things like that. And of course, more government involvement here. And so that's my presentation. And just to acknowledge some folks here, Dr. G for all her help, and Ben Harmon and Christina, Latasha, all of you all. Stephen Glass provided me some feedback here, and Dr. Singletary as well, and Mr. O'Brien for coming out to the presentation, and just all of those that I invited here, Dr. Patterson, Dr. Fogelman, Dr. Cook, Dr. Nacoste, and Dr. Ash. Just thank everybody for coming out, and of course, my family for supporting, and everyone for supporting. And we're gonna have time for Q&A after I go through my bibliography here. That's it for me. Thank you.
Thank you, Ben. Thank you for, sorry, Will. Thank you, Will, for that interesting presentation. We're ready to take questions and answers. Like I said before, you can go ahead and just write the questions in the chat, so Will can address your questions. We have a first question from Kristen. It says, you mentioned the LA Sprouts research coming out of the Jamie Davis labs at UT Austin, which is amazing. A lot of work in this field has been focused primarily in urban or semi-urban communities. However, I know that certain groups are starting to take a closer look at implementing these approaches in rural communities where poor health outcomes are the norm. Do you believe that these approaches will be effective in rural communities? If so, how might these initiatives vary in rural versus urban communities?
Yeah, thank you, Kristen. That's a great question. So I do think that these approaches will be effective in rural communities. I'll say that, from my experience over at the Post Center, the folks that we educate are, they have to be 50%, it's something like 50% of them are on receive SNAP education. And so I think you're right. I think that they would vary in rural versus urban communities. I guess my question is, when you say rural, could you elaborate on that for me?
Yeah, so I'm just referring to communities that would be like identified as rural, kind of not the city, not like urban, but like maybe like in farming communities that are typically like low income or they have really poor health outcomes. Maybe even they are doing a lot of farming and gardening, but maybe they don't have those type of initiatives going on in their communities at this time to teach them cooking skills.
Mm. Yeah, I think that would be more challenging as far as, maybe not having the funding there. Again, though, I guess I look at over at the Post Center where I'm at, and our population is generally is lower income, and it seems to work out okay over there. So maybe the same could be for the rural communities.
Right. Thank you, Kristen, for your question. We have Alexandra. She's asking, minorities and lower class families tend to have higher childhood obesity rates, typically associated with lack of funds or accessibility to more nutritious, healthier foods. Do you think there is a way to focus first on providing those healthier foods before moving on the educational side of nutrition? In your opinion, is that a feasible option?
That's a great question. So I think that, I think that's very important, to provide them with the healthier foods, of course. I also think that what I've seen done, in the past over at, for example, the Interfaith Food Shuttle is, they will sometimes give them foods to take home and utilize. I definitely think that providing those, I think it's both. I think that providing those healthier foods is certainly important, and making sure that they have access to them, but also having the education piece is equally as important, because, what do you do when you have those healthy foods and you don't know what to do with them?
Thank you. Now we have Dr. Gurel. She is asking to describe your ideal research study design if we wanted to determine how cooking classes impacts weight status.
That's a great question. Thank you for that. I feel like this would have to be one that was done over a much longer term than the ones that I saw. And gosh, I don't know how. I'm not 100% sure how that would be done. I guess it would be a longitudinal study, and that would be so fascinating, so interesting to me, to be able to look into that. Because I feel like it would be kind of one of those things where, the cooking classes and the education piece is given early on, but then, you're tracking more of weight outcomes and health related outcomes down the line. So it would certainly be interesting. That would be that would be the only way that I could see it kind of working.
Thank you, Will. I'm gonna just stop us for now, because it is 1 o'clock, and I know faculty may need to leave and others may need to leave. But I would like everyone to applaud Will before we say goodbye. And good job. And Andrea, if you don't mind sharing the next week, and then if anybody wants to stay on, if Will's able to answer some more questions.
Sure.
Thank you, Dr. Goodall. Again, thank you everyone for attending and for your time today for our seminar. Will, good job on your seminar. Please join us next week to the seminar. It will be presented by Brooke Anderson. The topic of our seminar will be on the impacts of replacing soybean meal with distillers' dry grains with solubles and crystalline amino acids on performance and carcass characteristics of growing and finishing pigs. So thank you everyone again.
If anybody, I know we have lots of questions here, but Will, I also know you have other things that you're needing to do. So Will, would you prefer to address these questions now, or would you like to send emails to people?
Let's knock them out.
Okay. And if you have to leave, please everybody don't stick around. It's not, we want you to be here, but Andrea, can you stay to facilitate? Or do you need
Sure.
to?
Yeah.
Okay.
I can keep, yeah.
Okay. Go for it.
Okay. So let's move to the next question from Natalie Cook. We are all learning about how to adapt and use virtual tools and techniques due to COVID-19. Can you describe what role technology might play in helping to increase access to nutrition education and cooking skills for children in the future?
That's a great question. I almost wanted to do a whole study on that alone. You know, so again, I'm gonna defer to my experience over at the Post Center here, and I know that, you know, for us over there, even post pandemic, the plan is to keep these classes, you know, keep virtual as well as in person, because it's really one of the really great things about it is being able to, you know, reach further communities that may not be able to come to the Post Center. So I certainly think that there are a lot of assets to the technology piece. And if, you know, even doing it from home, sometimes we do the classes from home, and but being in a kitchen, you know, where technology and, you know, have a headset and stuff like that, is with something like that, it's mellifluous. It's just very like it goes very smoothly. So I think it will only enhance.
Thank you. We have the next question from Sarah Ash. She's asking, what do you see as the relationship between school-based cooking classes and what happens in the home? What kind of influence can such programs have on parental behavior?
That's a great question too. So as far as the relationship between school-based cooking classes and what happens at home, you know, I really liked one of those studies that you know, they were doing the classes in the, you know, they were doing the classes away from home, but then they came back and they were talking about how, you know, how excited they were to, you know, prepare things like greens and prepare things that maybe they wouldn't necessarily like. And so, you know, and to kind of rope the parents in there too, you know, they were almost, from what I gathered, they were almost, you know, kind of getting the parents excited and on board for some of these recipes and whatnot that they were creating in their classes. So I think that, you know, it could certainly have an impact on parental behavior, especially with regards to, you know, how they look at healthy eating or how they look at food preparation. And I really think that's a wonderful point, and it could really be multifaceted and help in more ways than just in giving the children knowledge.
Can I just follow up for a second? Am I allowed to speak? It's interesting. It's just interesting to me that you took that approach, because I was thinking of it because I'm such a negative Nelly glasses half empty kind of person. I was thinking of it more from the standpoint of the parents as a barrier to change, so the kid learns all these cool things in school and then comes home, and then how do you, who does the grocery shopping, who makes decisions about what's for dinner. You talked in the beginning about, the kids and their, obesity being related to eating away from home, and all of those things that the parents might have more control over. And how do you use these cooking classes to to help deal with those kinds of issues? Or can you?
Yeah, I hadn't thought about that, actually. I hadn't thought about the shoe kind of being on the other foot there. I don't know.
Don't assume that the parents want to change.
No, that's a good point. I had not thought about that. And I don't know how you could subtly educate children about that, or how you could, I would have to think more about that. That's a great question.
Okay, thank you. So we have a question from Ben Harmon. He says, you talk about some of the influences of learning about cooking and nutrition from parents. I've read about the positive benefits of cooking at home and the positive effects of the family physically sitting down to a meal together versus snacking or everyone preparing their own meal. Which do you think should rise to a higher priority in most families?
That's a great question, Ben. I don't know if you're still in here. Nope. I guess I'm a little confused by the question. So which do you think should rise to a higher priority in families first? I think that, I don't know. I think sometimes those two go together, the cooking at home and sitting down to a meal together, sitting down to a meal together versus snacking or everyone preparing their own meal. I think that the sitting down to a meal together is extremely important, that the idea of having that positive kind of environment for children when they're eating, it seems like it was quite important.
Yeah, that's true. Thank you. Our last question from Brooke Anderson. She's asking, from my experience growing up in a rural community, a majority of children are actively involved in 4-H and are exposed to cooking projects they can take and exhibit at county fairs. Both my brother and I took multiple different projects and learned about meal prep and cake decorating and grilling. These projects are driven by 4-H extension programs. Do you think other states could be making more of effort to develop those programs and creating a more federal standard for extension programs across states? Or a way to expose more urban communities to these 4-H projects?
That's a great question. Oh, Brooke, you're on here. That's a great question, Brooke. Thank you. I feel I'm gonna be honest, I don't know that I know a whole lot about that. As far as, I'm not 100% sure with what 4-H is.
Okay, so I guess I can hop on and kind of explain. So we in Ohio are extension agents. Each county has a 4-H program. So traditionally you think, and I know here in North Carolina, a lot of 4-H is driven by livestock shows. So kids showing their pigs and sheep and feeder calves and all of that at the county fairs, and they get judged on their animal or showmanship. But in Ohio, our county fairs also have typically an entire building full of projects. So you can take a sewing project, you can take a cooking project, you can do small animals like guinea pigs. You can do even like tractor safety is a big one in our county. So a lot of these, like you have a workbook that you work through, and with the cooking ones especially, it talks you through making different meals or different cooking skills. And you basically, at least for one of my cooking ones, I ended up making cookies, and you like make a final batch of cookies, take it to the fair, you sit down with a judge, and they actually like interview you and ask you questions about your project and different things you've learned, like meal planning or measuring ingredients and stuff like that. So you get like your interview skills in addition to those cooking skills, and they judge you and you get a ribbon and you move on and compete at like the state level. So I'm guessing obviously that's probably not as big of a thing here in North Carolina.
It happens in North Carolina. I've done a lot of that 4-H judging. Yeah.
Okay, that's awesome to hear. So yeah, I guess my question was like, do you think that that's something that we could implement more in terms of, since it's not based through the schools, it's through those extension programs, and something that could be implemented kind of more widespread and kind of bring that into the rural community, into the urban communities somehow?
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. I don't know a lot about it, but based on what you just described, it sounds like it certainly couldn't hurt. More education, better.
I think one of the challenges with that, so the extension programs in general rely on a combination of state, local, county, and federal funding. And if you don't have either an extension agent available who's been directed that their goal is for 4-H programming, or if you don't have volunteers who are willing to do that, there are major limitations with implementing it regardless of where you are. It's more popular in the rural areas, but we do still see it in some of the urban areas. But I'd really encourage all of you, if you're not familiar with our extension programs, to kind of look at what is required of an extension agent. How do we even identify when we get extension agents in the counties? Because people have to, it's pockets of money that come together. And I think, Will, one of the things in general that is a big challenge, and you talked about time and resources, one major limitation of doing any of this is the idea of having the personnel qualified. And you talked about that too, with the idea of who's going to be teaching these classes, and the teachers say they aren't qualified to do it. And this is one of those areas where an extension agent would be wonderful if they were qualified to do it, but we also have limited money for people to do it. So I think that's a balance, a really big challenge there. But again, thank you so much for everyone attending today. I know we've got just a few more people, and Andrea, thank you for hosting. And we will look forward to hearing Brooke's presentation about pigs. I don't remember all the things, something about soy and pigs, but I'm excited about it for next week. See y'all later.